What's up, everybody?
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor live video. Coming to you on Sunday evening. Normally we do these videos every Sunday evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about some of the trials and tribulations that go along with being a travel therapist. We often talk about the benefits and some of the ins and outs of becoming a travel therapist and finding contracts and all those things, but we don't often talk about some of the downsides or some of the potential downsides that can happen. So we want to talk about those things tonight. We are coming to you live from Roanoke, Virginia. Days until we leave for Denver for CSM, so that's exciting. But Whitney's going to introduce us, and then we'll jump right into the trials and tribulations of being a travel therapist.
All right, hey everybody. For those that may not know us, my name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazazza.
And we are both traveling physical therapists. We run our website, Travel Therapy Mentor, and we also have a blog, Fifth Wheel Physical Therapist. Like Jared said, we try to do these videos every week to bring you guys some kind of education and information about becoming a travel therapist and some of the issues that you might face if you are a travel therapist. So tonight we're going to be talking about, like Jared said, some of the trials and tribulations, some of the frustrations that might happen, because not everything is always perfect when you're a travel therapist. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Jared's going to share our video in a few groups here so that more people can join on with us live. If you guys are tuning in, we'd love if you'd say hello in the comments and let us know that you're watching. Hey Jeff, thank you for joining us tonight. If anybody else is signing on, please say hello. So before we get started with tonight's topic, we do want to do a couple of quick announcements about kind of what's going on with us. So as Jared said, we're back in our hometown of Roanoke, Virginia. I just finished up a Travel PT contract in North Carolina on Friday. So we were down in North Carolina for the last 3 months. And now we're getting ready to go on some pretty cool adventures coming up. So we got a few days here at home, and then on Tuesday we're leaving to go to Denver for CSM, which is the National American Physical Therapy Association big conference of the year. So this year they're holding it in Denver, and we're excited because this will be our first time in Denver. And I'm sure there's going to be snow on the ground, which is going to be crazy because we actually haven't seen any snow yet this year. It's been a pretty mild winter in North Carolina. So if you guys are going to be at CSM, let us know. We are actually doing a travel therapy meetup at CSM. It's primarily for current travelers as well as PTs and third-year GPT students who are interested in doing travel therapy. We're actually pretty much at our max capacity for the event, so if you're interested in coming, please send us a private message and we'll see if we can make an exception to let you in, because we're pretty much at max capacity for the venue, which is super exciting. So it should be a great event. That's going to be in Denver next Friday. Oh, I see Matt is making comments about Raphael. So we are at...
So that picture, or that painting, I think it's a painting, has been in my room when I was a kid since probably 3 years old. I can remember it being in my room. So yeah, we're back at my mom's house, so that's my painting from when I was a kid.
Yeah, so we're trying to find a place to do the video tonight. We're at Jared's mom's, and we kind of found this little corner. And I don't know if you guys can hear a little bell jingling, but there's a cat, and we can't get her out of here, so she's kind of running around crazy. I wouldn't be surprised if she hopped in the video. She's already trying to drink my water. So that's the cat in the background. So that's something exciting. We're back home for a little bit. We're going to CSM. In about 4 weeks, we actually will leave for our big international trip. We're going to Latin America for 5 months. So we have, once we get back from CSM, we'll have just a couple weeks to get ready for that trip. We're also in the process of trying to sell our camper and our truck. Many of you guys may know that we traveled in a fifth wheel camper for the first part of our travel career, and since then we've kind of lived in it on and off, but it's been in storage a lot because right now we're not working full time. We're only taking a travel contract here and there and spending a lot of time out of the country, so we've decided to go ahead and sell the camper and the truck. We did have a buyer secured. If any of you guys follow along on our social media, we did have a buyer secured, but there was a problem with them being able to get the cash on the day we were supposed to exchange the camper and all that. So hopefully we'll have it sorted out by the time we get back from CSM, but as of now we do still own the camper.
Yep.
But yeah, so thank y'all for joining in. Like I said, I see Matt is on and Jeff. If anybody else is joining in, please say hello in the comments and let us know if you are a current travel therapist or if you're somebody who's looking into travel therapy. We definitely want this to be a conversation. We're going to talk about some of the things like the various mishaps that go on when you are a travel therapist. If y'all have any stories you would like to share in the comments, please do, and let us know what has kind of happened to you, what kind of trial and error has there been as a travel therapist.
Yep. So we kind of have it broken down into 3 categories of things that could go wrong. One is in the transportation part, like getting to a contract. Obviously there's issues there. The other is with housing, finding housing in each place and some of the problems that can arise there. And the third is with the contract itself and the actual facility that you're at and some of the things that can go wrong there. So we've got it broken down there, and yeah, if you guys have any input on any of these things, definitely let us know.
Yeah, so the first thing, just talking about contract issues, and we've done individual videos about some various contract issues before, but one big thing that can happen is contract cancellations. And we get asked all the time, how common is this? The answer is it depends on your discipline, and it depends on kind of the type of job.
It also depends the setting you're working in. So yeah, we've found some people, or we've heard from some people that are very frustrated because maybe their very first contract got canceled and they're like, wow, what traveling is like, I don't want to do it. And yeah, that does happen. It's unfortunate when it does, but I can tell you that it's not as common, at least in our experience. We are somewhere around 25 combined total contracts between the 2 of us, and we've only had 1 that was ended early. So, you know, it's not that common, at least for PTs and primarily outpatient, which is our experience. But like Whitney said, it seems that assistants sometimes have more contract cancellations. It also seems like people working in skilled nursing also have more contract cancellations. So maybe we've been a little shielded from that, but yes, it definitely does happen.
Yeah. So lots of things can happen here if you get your contract canceled. So for example, sometimes you'll sign the contract a few weeks in advance, and some people are experiencing the contract being canceled before you ever even start, which can be super frustrating. We've even heard of people kind of already on their way driving and moving to the new facility. Maybe you're moving across the country and finding out, you know, 1 or 2 days before it's supposed to start that your contract is canceled.
That's really a worst case scenario. Normally, when we have, you know, we talk to people and we give advice on their contracts and things like that, we always recommend having a 30-day cancellation notice if possible. And that means that once you start the job, if the facility, for whatever reason, say they hire someone permanent and they need to cut your contract short, you have a 30-day period that you're still going to get paid no matter what, where you can either hopefully find something in the area or find a new contract. But that doesn't apply before the contract starts, which is the really tough part. So this is really a worst case scenario, but yes, it can happen that say you sign a contract and you're driving to the contract and maybe 4 days before, you know, so say you're starting on a Monday, maybe on a Thursday or a Friday, the facility hires someone permanent and then they call your recruiter and say, we don't need that traveler, and then you don't have any protection there. And that's a big risk for travelers. And along with all of these things that we're going to talk about, this something I'll talk about a lot is the reason we're compensated more. I think some people feel guilty for making more as a travel therapist. And the reason we're compensated more is because of these issues. So things like your contract canceled, not finding right when you want, so you have to take unwanted time off. Those things decrease your pay, and also duplicating expenses. So when you include all of those things, it's not like we're just making all this money and we should feel guilty and we should work off the clock and do all these things. So I see a lot of people doing that because they feel bad about it. But the reason we get compensated more is because of all the risks that we're taking and that's basically inherent in these short-term contracts.
Hey Veronica, hey Amy, thanks for joining. Hi Taylor, thanks for watching. So like Jared said, sometimes if your contract goes to get canceled before you ever start, you don't really have any protections there. The one time it did happen to me, they actually were really nice. They did allow me to work out my 30-day notice, even though they found out in advance that they weren't going to need me. So they found out before I ever even started that they were going to have a permanent therapist coming on. So they didn't have to give me that 30 days, but they did. And I was really fortunate in that regard. So day 1, my clock kind of started. I knew on day 1 I was only going to have 30 days, and that gave me time to be able to find a new contract. Yeah. So the other thing to think about is if it gets canceled during your contract, maybe you've already started, maybe you've already been there a month or 2, and they decide, hey, we're canceling your contract. Like Jared said, it's best if you can try to have a 30-day notice written into your contract and to your agreement. Sometimes there will be a standard of 2 weeks, so you need to ask your recruiter, If it doesn't say it in the contract, ask them, can we make it 30 days? Because that gives you more protection. If it gets canceled while you're there, or even before, and you only have a 2-week notice, well, that gives you less time, so you're scrambling to try to find a new contract, figure out your new housing situation, and all of that.
Yeah, and in the case Whitney was talking about, where hers was ended early, she had 30 days. I was at the same facility. I had been there, and then she came and she got her notice. She was able to find something in the area that was commutable. So, yeah, that 30 days was vital because it took about 3 weeks for her to find that job, to get it secured, and then she just went right into the next job. So that's the ideal situation, and that's why you need to have that 30-day notice.
Yeah, with that kind of comes, as far as our recommendations go, when you're talking about housing, on the off chance you do get canceled, it's best to try to set up housing to where you're kind of month to month instead of being locked into a 3-month or a 6-month lease. Because then if you're month to month, at least if you have to leave because your contract got canceled, you'll only be out, 1 month or half a month's rent and not be out several months of rent.
I think that's extremely important. I think the people that have the worst time with travel are the ones that sign a lease for say 3 months and then their contract gets canceled really early on and they can't find something else in the area and they're stuck in that lease. So then remember, you're duplicating expenses. So you're paying rent at home, you're paying rent for this apartment now that you can't find work around, and then you might have to go to another place and pay rent also there. So that is a terrible, terrible situation. So if possible, a 30-day notice and paying month to month can mitigate a lot of that risk.
Yeah. So next I want to get into talking about some things that can happen in regards to the facility, some issues that can come up, and Jeff kind of highlighted a few in his comment here, a few of the ones I wanted to talk to. So Jeff said some issues you could face would be internal changes within the company. So for example, them changing your hours on you, having problems with your staff members floating between multiple clinics. For example, sometimes your contract may say that there's a possibility of floating, but you don't know what that means. So that's something that we've actually encountered before, where it didn't say anything in our clinic or in our contract about floating, but then when we were there, we were actually asked to cover some other territories and other buildings. And we know we've met a lot of people that were faced with the same situation where you never agreed to necessarily float, but then when you got there, they said, oh, by the way, we need you to work at this other clinic sometimes.
Yeah, when it's up front, it's usually not a big deal because then at least you know. So say you interview for a job and they say, okay, you might be at this clinic and then you might have to work sometimes at this clinic 10 miles away. And at least you can make an informed decision there. But there are times when you will get to a clinic and maybe they're not as busy as they thought they would be and they don't have enough hours for you. And so they kind of put you in the situation where they're like, well, we have this clinic down the road that could use you part of the time. Or they don't say this usually, but they kind of imply that we don't have enough work for you, we might have to cancel your contract. Mm-hmm. So then you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Or they might not even imply that, but you feel bad because you're like, wow, say you have a 40-hour guarantee and you're only working 30 hours, and you know that you're getting paid for 40 no matter what. Yeah, that's wonderful for you, but you feel bad for the clinic because you're only putting in 30 hours. So you think, okay, maybe if I did that. But the issue is that sometimes it's not as straightforward as you think. Maybe you go to that other clinic and it's really not good, or maybe it's farther than you think. And so yeah, we've been in that situation. We know a lot of travelers that have as well, and you have to be very careful how you approach that situation with the manager and ask a lot of questions about it before you agree.
Yeah, so if you get put in that situation, we've mentored a lot of people that were put in that situation. You just have to figure out how it is that you want to handle it. If it's a short distance away and you're okay with it and you want to move forward with it, just make sure to let your recruiter know, hey, they're asking me to go to this other facility. It wasn't written in my contract, but I'm okay with it. Just let them know how it's going. If it's not in your contract and you don't agree with it and you don't want to do it, then make sure to talk to your recruiter. Don't stay silent. Don't just feel like you have to be pressured to do so. But you do have to understand there might be a pushback where they say, well, we might have to cancel your contract, and then you have to weigh your options. But definitely keep your recruiter in the loop, maintain positive relationships with your director, and try to do your best to work it out. But it's tricky when that wasn't written in your contract and you might find out something different when you get there. Other things that you might face when you get there is sometimes you can't always predict when you have the phone interview what the facility is going to be like. We always encourage you try to ask as many questions as possible about what the productivity expectations are, what the clinic flow is like. Are there support staff that are going to help you? Don't assume anything. Don't assume, well, I worked at a SNF before and it was like this, so it'll be the same. Or I worked at an outpatient before and it'll be the same. It's not necessarily going to be the same.
We just had somebody contact us the other day that was in this exact situation. They got to a skilled nursing facility that wanted 100% productivity. And we made videos in the past about productivity and how we feel about that, and obviously that's probably not going to be a good environment. And the way they're justifying that is with groups. Okay, well, if you see a group and you're with 4 people, say 3 or 4 people, then that counts productivity for all of them. But that's a terrible position to put yourself in, where you have to see groups in order to meet the productivity requirement. And so the person's question was like, well, what can I do about this? And really, it's very tough once you're already in the facility, and that's why we always recommend asking those questions. Ask a ton of questions in the interview. The interview is so vital, your interview with the manager, and it's vital on their end, but it's really vital on your end to ask questions about productivity and staff and all those things. Someone else mentioned that it should be written in the contract, your productivity, but we do not like that. We don't like it being in a contract either. I guess depending on what the productivity requirement is. So say it's something like 80% or something very reasonable, maybe that's okay. But there are some facilities that will push to have like a 90% productivity clause written in the contract. And the reason they put that in there is because then if you don't meet that, they say, okay, well, we can't pay you this full amount because you're not meeting the requirement. So we don't like to have it written in the contract, but it is vital to ask those questions of the manager before you get there. Because once you're in that position, it's tough.
You basically want to have a verbal agreement, and then if they say, well, we like you to be around 85 or 90, well then sometimes we just pass on those contracts if it seems unreasonable, but other times if it seems relatively reasonable and maybe we really want that location or whatever, we'll just press the DOR to be like, well, what happens if I have a lot of progress reports that day, or a lot of evals, or a lot of non-visit discharges? And if the DOR seems reasonable, like, well, it's okay if sometimes it goes a little bit lower, or, we'll work it out. If they seem reasonable, you can kind of understand what you might be getting yourself into.
Yeah.
But you just never know. Like, sometimes you might get there and you might think they're going to be reasonable and they're not.
Yeah, you just have to make sure that the manager is realistic with what they're asking you to do, and yes, very reasonable with the fact that it's not always going to go according to plan. What happens, non-visit discharges, things like that. Yeah. And mostly that only applies to skilled nursing, but of course you want to ask those questions for all settings, productivity requirements, what it's going to be like, and all that.
Yeah, the other thing that you absolutely can't predict is what's the dynamic going to be with your coworkers and with your DOR. I mean, nobody's going to divulge that the clinic sucks or that the staff sucks in your interview. So that's the kind of thing that you just might learn as you get there. Like, wow, I really don't mesh with these people, and it's a really toxic environment.
Yeah.
And these are all things you just have to weigh. You're not always going to have perfect situations. Is it something that you can get through for the 13 weeks? Maybe. If it's not, then at that point you have to ask yourself, is it worth it for me to stay here, or am I going to need to cancel and put in my 2 weeks or 30-day notice? And that kind of sucks. You've taken the commitment to move there and, get set up and everything, get your housing set up, and now you're like, gosh, this job really sucks. Is my sanity worth staying here? So there's definitely a lot of things that can happen when you get there that you just couldn't predict.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the contracts that need travelers, it's because they have a lot of turnover, or they recently had people leave, or, obviously there's other reasons, but those are the most common clinics that we see, and usually there's a reason for that. It can be productivity requirements that were too much for the people and they left or whatever, but sometimes it's just the environment is not great. So yeah, that's hard to know up front. You can ask questions all you want, but no one's gonna say like, oh yeah, there's a lot of negativity here. You never hear those kind of things.
Yeah. Matt also mentioned things like protecting your license in certain situations. If you're asked about like supervising other individuals, so say you're a PT and you're asked to supervise PTAs and techs and whatnot, you do want to understand your State Practice Act and understand how many assistants you're allowed to supervise, understand if you feel comfortable. Like sometimes I've heard of travelers getting a student thrown on with them and they didn't agree to that, so definitely advocate for yourself. Don't think I have to do it because the DOR said I did. Definitely stand up for yourself in those situations. Other things in regards to protecting your license are just, we see this a lot at SNFs, like being asked to bill a certain way or meet a certain productivity when you know you might be committing Medicare fraud. To do so, stand up for yourself. Don't just do it because the director said it. Don't just do it because the other people who are permanent staff are doing it and have been doing it that way for years. You need to be very confident in yourself and your skill set when you come in as a traveler to know what's right.
So one other issue with contracts, and then we'll get into more about the moving issues and housing, is issues with paychecks. And this is something we've had some experience with this, but we've seen a lot of other travelers complain about this. Issues with errors in the paycheck, because obviously we have money coming from a variety of different places. Some is tax, some is from stipends for housing, meals, incidentals, some are reimbursements. So you have all these things that go into your paycheck each week. And sometimes, not always does that go according to plan, and not always does do you get exactly what you're owed. So you have to keep an eye on that, more so than I would think that you would have to in a permanent job, where, especially a salary permanent job, where your pay is going to be the same every time, and you just have to make sure the number's right. Whereas
some things that you might, like why it might be wrong or why it might be different every week is, for example, every single week you're having to fill out an individual time card because we are hourly employees. So if you're a regular salaried employee, your paycheck should be pretty much the same across the board. Well, think about how many people, when I fill out my timesheet, whether it's paper or online, it has to go through several gets to payroll. So it goes through me, maybe my DOR has to sign off on it, maybe then it goes to the recruiter or the payroll, and then whoever is responsible for paying you, and then the paycheck comes to you via direct deposit. Well, what happens if they calculated the hours wrong? You know, you're like, I worked 40 hours. Why didn't I get paid for 40 hours? You have to check your paycheck every week, because I definitely fell in the trap of just thinking, oh, they've got it down, like I'm just going to get paid normal every week. And I've had errors on my paycheck where I wasn't paid what I was owed because maybe the hours were calculated wrong, or for example, maybe you had a 40-hour guarantee and they didn't uphold it. Maybe you only worked 32 hours one week, but you were supposed to get paid for 40, but they forgot to do that. So you have to advocate for yourself and check your paycheck every week to make sure it's right. Maybe there was a holiday week and they didn't pay you, but you thought you were going to get paid. You need to ask. One thing that happened another time with me, which was interesting, is I worked a contract relatively close to my home.
it was 48 miles away.
Yeah. And I had been working with one company at that job, and I was getting paid non-taxable pay. I was getting paid the stipend just like a regular traveler. And then I left that facility, and then I ended up returning back to that facility with a different company at a later time. So I just assumed, well, I was a traveler there before, I got paid a certain way before. Well, this new company was interpreting it differently, and they said, oh, this is a local contract because you're 48 miles from home.
They had an internal rule. We've talked in the past about, there's this myth in the travel therapy world or in the travel nursing world about 50-mile rule, saying that you have to be at least 50 miles away for it to be a travel contract. That is not an IRS guideline, but some companies do have that as a rule for their company. So this was a company that had that as a rule, and because it was 48 miles, Whitney had to take all of her pay tax, which is obviously led to about $200 or $300 less a week, which is not ideal.
And well, I want to say I might have gotten it rectified, but basically for the first several weeks, I got paid all taxed, and so I lost a lot of money. And then basically I was able to work it out later in the contract and sign a form that said I was duplicating expenses or whatever, and they made an exception and they changed it. But for those first several weeks, they were like, we can't give you that money back, it's just gone, we just taxed it. So, you know, I ended up making way less than what I thought I was going to make because of this one form I needed to fill out. So definitely check your paycheck. Don't just trust like what your recruiter told you, because we've had so many people reach out where they were like, well, the recruiter quoted me that I was going to make, you know, $17.50 a week take home, but when I actually started getting my paychecks, I noticed it was way less. So somewhere there was a disconnect.
Keep an eye on that stuff.
Yeah.
Bethany said 2 words, immediate cancellation. I think she was talking about the 100% productivity, probably.
Right.
Yeah, we would agree with that.
Hey guys, hey Kiana, hey Brianna, hey Kara, thank y'all for joining in.
Brianna said, is 90% with PDPM deemed reasonable in skilled nursing setting? It's definitely borderline, especially evaluating therapists. It depends on how many groups you have. It depends on what counts as productivity, because we've been in some skilled nursings where your evaluation minutes don't count and meeting minutes don't count. And if that's the case, there's no way to get that productivity. So you need to ask those questions. What counts towards productivity?
I think it's definitely more reasonable now that obviously we know skilled nursing is doing more groups and more concurrent than they used to. So yeah, I mean, there are some places that are asking for over 100% now, and it's possible, but you still have to take into account, Brianna, that you are the one who has to make the decision of whether the group or the concurrent is appropriate. So still 90% might be kind of hard to meet sometimes. So you just have to ask those detailed questions of like, what's the patient population like, and what are the other staff members like, and how many PTAs am I supervising, or OTAs, or whatever it might be in your situation.
Yep. Jeff said we didn't realize our estimated paycheck didn't include our insurance deduction. It wasn't much, but still a surprise. Yeah. So most of the time, recruiters are quoting pay based on no deductions, so no health insurance or anything taken out. So yeah, a lot of travelers, once they sign up for health insurance or they contribute, say, 3 or 5% to their 401k or whatever they decide to do, their pay's less, and that's a surprise. So keep an eye on contracts. I mean, that is a normal thing. There's nothing wrong with that, but just be aware that that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, with budgeting, you might just be expecting you're getting a certain amount. Something similar to that I think a lot of people find is they expect, okay, I'm going to get paid this per week, but if they find out they only have a 32 or 36-hour guarantee, if they don't end up getting their full 40 hours, they don't get whatever you were quoted because they always quote the pay based on working 40 hours.
Yeah, so it could be significantly less.
Yeah, so these are just things you need to be aware of as a traveler, some hiccups that can happen in regards to your actual contract and the actual facility.
Yep.
So next we want to get into talking a little bit about some problems that you can encounter while you're moving or with housing issues, which tend to be a big headache for travelers. And honestly, like, I think I saw something on a different group today where they were like, what's one reason that you stopped traveling? And I've heard from some people saying, like, they just got sick of the moving and the housing and that kind of thing, and they just got sick of it and they wanted to stay somewhere longer and go perm, and it definitely can be a headache.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about a few different things. Those are the most common things we saw in contract. We're going to talk about a few of the most common things we see with issues with moving and housing. First though, if you guys are enjoying this video, if you're getting some kind of benefit from this knowledge, please like or heart the video, or even one of those laughing faces. I'm not picky, but any
maybe not an angry face, like, or a sad one. I hope we're not making you angry or sad on this Sunday evening, but if we're making you happy and giving you education, please just give us a thumbs up on the video. We'd appreciate it.
All right, so talking about moving issues, we've been actually pretty lucky. We were kind of crazy our first couple of years, and I think a lot of that was because of me wanting to work as much as possible, make as much as possible. I was trying to work overtime, work PRN, do things on the side. I was really pushing the boundaries. So along with that, we were taking back-to-back contracts. So meaning we would end on a Friday and start on a Monday. So we really were stretching ourselves thin sometimes with these moves. We had one that was a 12-hour move, and we only had a weekend to do it, including packing, getting there, unpacking, being at work on Monday.
And it snowed.
Yeah, I would not recommend doing that. And so there's a lot of issues that can happen. And with us doing that, I think we've been relatively lucky with how things turned out, because it could have been a lot worse. And now if I could go back, I probably wouldn't have put ourselves in that position where we were so stressed to get to the place and everything. But issues, of course, like cars breaking down, things like that. And that did happen to us. And luckily, it was we'd worked almost nonstop for well over a year. And the one time that our car did break down was when we were actually taking a break and coming back to our hometown for a couple weeks. So,
well, and we were lucky because we actually were able to fix it the same day. We didn't have to like stay overnight at a shop or something like that. But we have definitely heard of people with much worse issues. Somebody commented earlier and said they got in a really bad wreck. And as you can imagine, say you're moving on a Saturday or Sunday and places are closed and you're in the middle of nowhere and you can't get a mechanic to fix it right away. So you could have a wreck, you could have a car breakdown, you could have an RV malfunction, which luckily we never had a lot of that. We did the one time it was a problem with our truck while we were pulling the camper, and we're sitting there on the side of the road of like, how do you even get towed if you have a camper? Like, what if the truck needs towed? Do we just unattach from the camper and leave our house on the side of the road and get the truck towed? And of course it was like a Saturday or a Sunday, you know. It would have been a major problem, but we were able to fix whatever the problem was ourselves, thank God. But there's lots of headaches and hassle, and what if you're halfway across the country and you don't have any support system around, you don't have someone to come and pick you up, and you don't have your normal repair shop around. So we always encourage you to try to leave ample time to get from A to B in case, God forbid, you were to have an accident or something were to break. The other thing is weather.
Yeah, so the breakdowns and repairs, that's probably the biggest issue, because if you're halfway across the country, you break down, it's not like you can just rent a car and keep going, because you can't leave your car there. So sometimes that could take, several days, and if you're very unlucky, depending on the repair, it could even be longer than that. And if you're rushing to get to a contract, then obviously that's going to cause a lot of issues. But yeah, bad weather as well. So things like snowstorms that weren't expected, or even heavy rain, things like that slow you down. Cause traffic, cause road closures, things like that. that stuff happens more commonly than you'd think, especially when you travel all the way across the country. Say for a contract from the East Coast to the West Coast, there are a ton of issues or a ton of bad weather you can run into along the way.
So obviously with all of these moving issues, so breakdowns, wrecks, weather, this could cause a delay in the start of your contract. So if you would cut yourself too short on time and didn't have enough time to get to your contract, it might be a delay. If that were to happen to you, sometimes the facility will be able to accommodate you, but if not, it could run into an issue where they might say, you know, we're gonna have to get somebody else if this is really gonna take you a significant amount of time. Hopefully if it was just a day or 2 days, it wouldn't be the case, but it could cause a problem.
Which would be the worst of everything we've talked about. If your car broke down, it took you a week to get it fixed, to get to the place, and then they canceled your contract and you didn't have that notice because you hadn't started yet, that would be awful. So hopefully that doesn't happen.
Yeah, but it could. Not only that, but a lot of headache, a lot of stress, but then also it could incur extra costs. So this is where we always encourage you guys to have an emergency fund for issues that come up like this. Even in general, like say it's not while you're moving, but we're using our cars and our vehicles a lot more than if we were just driving locally in town. So you need to have extra cash on hand in case you have a major repair or something like that, because you're using your car a lot more. So we always encourage you to have an emergency fund in case of these situations.
Yep, and the main way to avoid these kind of things is plot out your course ahead of time, look at the weather conditions along your route, make sure that you're doing routine maintenance on your car and that everything's checked out before you leave, especially if you're not very handy with things. Have someone check it out for you, make sure there's not something that will go wrong along the way, because that's, or at least do your due diligence there and try to minimize that risk. Yeah. Because can be a worst case scenario.
One thing I would also encourage about planning out your route is do some research, because there's a lot of Facebook groups that we're in where you can ask other travelers for advice. A lot of people who have done cross-country moves quite often, or you can use Google, use Family, whatever. There's a lot of places that it might look like it's okay on the map, but you might run into mountains or bad terrain that you weren't expecting, especially if you're hauling a camper.
Yeah.
So we've found quite often that we look at a map and we think, oh, this is the shortest route, we'll just take this route. One time we ran into this, it was my fault, because I wanted to go on the Parkway in Virginia, near where we live, and I wanted to take some pictures up on the Parkway of an overlook of this mountain. So I said, okay, we can just go this way, and then on the way back we'll go this way to get to where we need to be. Well, what I didn't know was that there were some what do they call them, hairpin turns, some really tight turns, and we actually ended up scraping the back of our camper, like going 5 miles an hour around this turn, because it really wasn't a camper friendly route, but we just had no idea.
It was awful. It was really bad.
It could have been worse. It wasn't that bad.
It was pretty bad.
We just messed up one stabilizer jack and had to get it repaired, but it was fine.
Yeah.
But it could have been a lot worse, I think. So, if it had been snowy or treacherous conditions, do your research.
All right, so those are the main things with moving. Now we're going to talk about housing issues, some of the issues there. And this, I think a lot of travelers, besides the fact of, having to change facilities so much and being worried about their skill set and things like that, probably the next biggest worry that new travelers have is housing. And it's understandable. It's a scary thing. And even now, we're selling our camper, we're going to be doing short-term housing whenever we take contracts now. It's nerve-wracking even for an experienced person. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong there.
Yeah, so those of you guys that are still watching, obviously if you're a current traveler, I know Jeff is, and Laura, tell us if you've had any problems or any nightmare stories with your housing. We had a couple comments on our post earlier today about bad housing. So let us know if you have any stories or any issues, but there's numerous things that can go wrong. So first off, just the process of finding housing is a headache. It's one of the major headaches of trying to find somewhere that will accommodate short-term housing. With your time frame, sometimes they just won't rent short-term, and you're really having to scavenger, look through Craigslist, look through Airbnb, call around to local apartment complexes. It can be a headache just trying to set up housing in general. Sometimes you're doing it sight unseen. Quite often, actually, you're doing it sight unseen. You're just calling a place, arranging for something, and then you get there, and it may or may not be what you expected.
Yeah, and kind of a worst-case scenario, I would say, with housing is, sight unseen. For a lot of the time, that's okay. So things like an apartment complex that has a website, you can at least go look. Airbnb, it has reviews, it has pictures, at least you know. We have found housing a couple times on Craigslist, and luckily for us that has been good, but you have to be very careful there because we have heard of situations where a listing for an apartment or a house or something like that for rent, it'll just be a made up place. Like someone will make a listing with an address and take a picture of a random house that might be abandoned or that they don't even own or something like that and put it on Craigslist and say like, oh, $900 a month. And if you're looking for renting a place and you find that and you think, oh, $900, that's great, I can afford that. And you send a message and they say, okay, well just Venmo me the security deposit. A lot of landlords won't like secure the room for you if they don't have some sort of deposit. So you have to be very careful there and make sure that this is a real listing. And ideally, you want to see it in person, but you can't always do that if it's across the country. So at least talk to someone on the phone and make sure things sound legitimate and don't just go based on a listing and some email conversations back and forth and then Venmo someone money, because there have been a lot of situations where there's nothing, it's not a real place, and that person just keeps your money and you get there and you have nowhere to stay.
Yeah, and what some people choose to do instead of doing it sight unseen because of all these issues you can face is they'll just set up something for the first few days or the first week when they get there, stay at a hotel, and then when they get there actually go and visit places in person and check things out. That's one way to try to combat that issue. The other thing is finding things that are reasonably priced. So sometimes it can be really difficult because people want to charge an arm and a leg for short term because there's a lot more risk and turnover for them. Sometimes on Airbnb it can be quite expensive. I see Jeff here mentioned Furnished Finder. Furnished Finder is a really great option. It's kind of tailored more towards travel healthcare professionals, so it tends to be a little more reasonable. They're usually vetted better, so you can pretty well trust that they're pretty good places on Furnished Finder. So we would definitely recommend that. Jeff also mentioned that it can be hard to find month to month. Sometimes they want you to lock in for that 3-month contract. But like we mentioned before, you can really set yourself up in a bind if you commit to a 3-month contract or a 3-month lease, and then your contract gets canceled. The other thing is finding housing for 2, or if you're somebody who likes to have a little more space. So sometimes you can find a room to rent in someone's house short term, but you might not be able to find an independent private place, like a 1 or 2 bedroom. That can definitely be a challenge as well.
Yep. Some other issues that we've seen, we've sort of had some issues with this, but issues with the landlord or a roommate in the place that you're renting. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's always going to be like little quirks that people have that maybe you have or the landlord has or whatever. Usually you can work through those things and figure out some agreement or some kind of compromise, but sometimes there's situations where you can't work around that. Like there's some issue that's going on with the landlord or a roommate in the same place that causes a situation where you have to leave the place.
Yeah, we had one where we stayed at not necessarily a room in a house. It was kind of our own private space, but we were still sharing some things like the kitchen and whatnot with the landlord, and it turned out to be very extremely picky and just nitpicking and micromanaging every little thing that we did, and it was really made us very uncomfortable. We managed to get through it for a few months, but it was definitely uncomfortable and not an ideal situation.
Yeah.
We've definitely heard of people like they live with a roommate or they live with a landlord that only gives them like a little bit of fridge space or like just very minimal space to put their things and just kind of really micromanages what they can and can't do and makes them feel very uncomfortable. At the same place we stayed, the landlord didn't want the other tenant having guests over, meaning like their significant other, and that was a problem, and it just made them feel very uncomfortable. So there's a lot of issues you can run in there when you're changing housing quite often, and you're not always going to get the perfect roommate or perfect landlord experience.
Yeah. One other thing that we've seen some people have issues with is say you move into a place that's a 1-bedroom place for 3 months or something like that, and you put down first month's or 1 month's rent as a deposit, and then you leave and you're in a time crunch to get to the next assignment, and then the landlord says, oh, well, there's an issue with some damage here that wasn't here when you got here, but it was there, so some issues with getting your deposit back. We've heard a lot of people have issues with that, and usually that is going to be through a third-party type thing, where like a Craigslist or something like that, where there's not as much protection there for the person renting, whereas like Airbnb or something, you could go to Airbnb and say, this is how it was, and they might believe you more. But you know, if it's a Craigslist agreement and you just have a signed lease, your only recourse is to take that person to court, which may or may not be possible if you're leaving the area, or so you have to be careful about those kind of things.
Yeah. So those were kind of the major areas that we wanted to talk about, were kind of just like issues while you're on contract, because a lot of people have nightmare stories about terrible facilities, terrible DORs, terrible coworkers, issues with moving, issues with housing. There was a couple other things that Matt had mentioned that kind of weren't where our head was at with this video, but we can mention them too. He had talked about working with multiple recruiters and like the process of getting submitted to jobs. Yeah, that whole like job search, job submittal thing can definitely cause a lot of headache and a lot difficulties being a travel therapist. It's not as easy as you do one interview for a permanent job and you're there forever. You're obviously doing a lot more turnover with contracts, so you're having to do a lot more phone interviews and worry about getting submitted to jobs. We definitely encourage you guys to work with multiple recruiters. We always say that. But yeah, then it runs into, okay, you want to make sure that the recruiters don't submit you to the same jobs. You're juggling different interviews. You're trying to decide, you have an offer from this one, but you're still waiting to hear back from this one. There's a lot of headaches and frustrations that go into that job searching process, and that wasn't something I thought about mentioning, but certainly is.
And a lot of these things can be mitigated with doing your due diligence, whether it be contract related, travel related, housing related. If you put in the effort up front, you don't just jump blindly into things like we see a lot of travelers do, either with the contract or with housing, or, you know, I've had this car for 10 years and haven't done any maintenance to it, and then I'm going to take it across the country. Don't do those things. Do your do the upfront work. That will save you a lot of headache in the long run.
Laura said, lost you for a minute. Did we cut out for a minute, or was it just Laura's? Let us know if you guys missed anything. We can repeat anything that was missed. Laura says, my next contract is in Daytona. It's winter. It's about to be race week, bike week, and then spring break. What fun. Struggling to find a place that I could afford being there for work. I'm not getting stipends for this contract, so it's worse. I had to be out of my rental in Fort Myers today. I had nowhere to go, and I'm heading to my parents' house.
Oh man, yeah. So you have to be very careful with those situations where if you're looking for housing and there's going to be some event in the middle where landlords or people in the area aren't going to want to rent for a long term because they know they can increase the prices for, say, that 1 week period, you can run into a lot of problems there. So definitely have to be careful with that stuff.
Yeah, so that kind of covers most of what we wanted to talk about. Do you guys have any additional questions or concerns? I know when you're thinking about getting into travel therapy, you have so many questions and so many things that you're like, I don't know how this would work. How would it go? There's a lot of things that can go wrong as a travel therapist, but like we talk about and promote on our page all the time, we love travel therapy. We think it's the best decision we've ever made. Is it perfect all the time? No, it's not. Like, I feel like some people will accuse us of making it sound too good to be true. We've had a really good experience overall. Yes, we've had headaches, but I think there's going to be headaches with anything in life, and you just have to kind of pick your poison, you know, choose the problems and dilemmas that you want to have. There's problems and dilemmas at having a permanent job too, you know, that's my take on it personally.
Yeah, and what kind of spurred this thinking about doing this video is a friend of mine was saying he started traveling after we did, and he was saying that reading the articles and stuff that I wrote made it seem like everything was great, and I try not to do that. I try to be realistic, but I guess, yeah, we don't cover all the issues that can possibly arise, and there are quite a few things for sure.
And everybody's going to have a different experience. You know, we put this post out earlier today, and lots of people commented and said, oh my god, this terrible thing happened to me, and this terrible thing happened to me, and I was like, wow, like, that's never happened to us before, but, you know, it's just luck of the draw. You never know what's going to happen. So we always encourage you to do your due diligence, do your research, try to be as prepared as possible. Always, always, always have a backup plan, have an emergency fund for any lost time of work or any unexpected repairs, any unexpected costs that you might incur, because there is a lot more uncertainty, I think, is the bottom line when you're a travel therapist, but you deal with that part of it to be able to have the good parts of it. You know, you deal with the uncertainty and the problems that can happen in order to have the amazing experiences, see the country, experience new settings, make a little bit more money, all those positives that we always talk about with travel therapy.
Rose says, has anyone experienced a bad recruiter at a good company? I don't know how to switch recruiters. I've called to speak with a different one, but that one will call me back. Probably won't call me back. Yeah, definitely. There are a ton of bad recruiters at good companies. Usually what you have to do in that situation is call and ask to talk to a supervisor of some sort, tell them the situation, and they should be able to give you a new recruiter.
Yeah, and sometimes people just don't click well. Like we've even, had maybe a recruiter that we liked and somebody else didn't like, or vice versa. Like somebody recommended us a recruiter and we just didn't mesh well with them. And it happens, and usually if you take it professionally to whoever that recruiter's supervisor is, they will be willing to help you and want to work with you because they don't want to lose your business. They want to provide good customer service, so they're going to be willing to switch you in most circumstances.
Yeah, reaching out directly to another recruiter is probably not the way to do it because they don't want to step on the other recruiter's toes. That's a coworker of theirs. They're not just going to tell them, oh, they don't want to work with you, they want to work with me instead. So instead, go one level up, explain it in nice terms, what the issue is and why you want to switch, and they're going to be understanding of that.
Yeah. And as always, since we're talking about recruiters, if you guys want to know which recruiters that we've had a good experience with and that we would recommend, please reach out to us. You can comment recruiter on the video or send us a private message. We'd be happy to help because that makes a big difference in your experience as a traveler. A lot of these contract issues, you need somebody in the corner that's going to help you. If you get into a bad situation at a clinic, you don't want a recruiter that's just going to say, oh, well, tough luck, get over it, nothing we can do about it.
Or we've had a situation where one of our recruiters is almost like robotic with their answers. Like, we're having a problem with productivity or the way scheduling is, and she's like, well, according to this, the average is 14 patients per day, so you should be able to see that many in the allotted time. It doesn't help me at all. Okay,
no.
Thanks.
Right, and we also had a situation where the recruiter was just more on the client side, meaning the facility side, like, well, the facility said that you need to be able to do this and you agreed during your interview that you were going to do that, so why are you not doing that? And we're like, hello, you're supposed to be an advocate for us too. There needs to be somewhere in the middle. So needless to say, that's not a recruiter that we're working with anymore. So if you guys want recommendations for the ones that we do work with and we do like, please give us a shout and we'll help you because it'll make a huge difference in your travel career if you have good recruiters.
Yep. All right, so that's all we want to talk about. Next week, next Sunday, we're going to be in Denver. I think we're going to try to still make a video. We'll do a video on some topic there. Who knows what it'll be on? If you guys have any suggestions, let us know.
It might be Monday next week, just depending because we'll have conference stuff going on the weekend. So there's a chance it'll be Monday, but stay tuned on our page, Travel Therapy Mentor on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll post about the video and let you know what the topic will be next week.
Yep. Thank you guys for watching. Again, if you got value from this video, please like it, heart, comment, any engagement.
Tag a friend if you have somebody that you want to educate about this part of travel therapy, because I think all too often we and other people in the travel therapy community kind of hype up the good parts, but you definitely want to let somebody know. If you have a friend or a classmate or a coworker that's thinking about travel therapy, have them watch this video too so they can learn about some of the things to look out for so they can hopefully try to avoid some of those situations.
Yep. All right. See you guys next week.
Have a great night.
Bye.